Well done, boys and girls. You've made it to the final episode of our series. Well done. But you're not quite at the end yet. Prepare yourself for the final, terrifying episode. As a scholar and a historian of the 1800s, John had thought this would be the best way, although illegal in 2018, to resolve their problem. He was surprised Charles had agreed. He didn't know Charles knew about guns, but should have guessed, Charles being an officer in the Met. It all started when Rachel had almost broken down his front door in the early hours one Saturday morning. He'd pulled the door open and she'd stumbled in, mascara running down her face. He took his stepsister into the kitchen and made some tea. "What happened, Rach?" he'd asked. She explained how Charles had forced himself on her, raping her. "Oh my God," was all he could say. And that's when he'd planned the duel. Initially, Charles had told him not to be so stupid, as nothing had happened. But John knew what he'd been told. He kept pressing Charles. Charles caved in and insisted he'd pick the place. The stupidity had to end, Charles had thought. John believed this was justice, not a gamble, and knew this was the right thing to do. As he stood back to back with the rapist, revolver in hand. 10 paces and turn, he said. He'd been allowed the count. 9. 10, he'd said, and turned. The bullet from Charles's revolver hit him between the eyes. His forehead fragmented, gobbets of brain matter sprayed. John crumpled lifeless. Knowing police procedure, Charles removed the body, hid it, then returned to town. "I've no idea why that idiot thought I'd done what he said I did, you know," Charles explained to Rachel as they sat in a pub. Rachel just shrugged. Inwardly, she smiled. "I just couldn't take any more of it," Charles continued his explanation. Rachel nodded, understanding. When she got home, she cracked open a bottle of champagne, then pulled her stepmother's will from the solicitor's envelope once again. Should Janine Holworth's son, John Holworth, die through no action of his own, nor action of family or extended family, then Janine Holworth's estate will pass to her stepdaughter, Rachel Dewhurst. Rachel smiled at the last paragraph. Eve sat opposite Adrian for the first time in a while. She rubbed her knuckles hard enough for him to hear her fingers click. He knew she was furious. Every time she invited him to the cafe, he knew it wasn't ever just for light-hearted conversation. "So what's the deal, Adrian?" she asked. "The deal," he replied. "The promises, or lack of keeping them." Adrian blinked in surrender. The waitress came over and took their orders, a welcome break. They both ordered the same thing they always had when they were together. Some things never changed, although Adrian noticed she was still wearing her wedding ring. "I was overrun at work. I couldn't get away to even warn you about it," he pleaded. "So you just left our son outside the school for an hour in the rain?" she shot. Adrian held his hands up and shook his head. "He got home safe, right?" he said. "Because of Steph, Matthew's mum. And that's only because she lives opposite the school. You know it was the only thing I had to trust you with on a Friday when I attempted to do something else in my life." Adrian started to hesitate and shift in his seat. He then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small bag of marijuana and threw it down on the table. Eve's eyes widened and she snatched it away, hiding it just before the waitress came back to set their meals down. The The woman eyed her wearily, to which Eve just responded by smiling. "It's funny how you can keep some promises," said Eve. After breakfast, Adrian paid the bill and stepped outside with her. "Thanks for breakfast, but I promise you won't be seeing your son if you try that again," she threatened. Adrian let her walk off and turned back into the cafe to speak to the waitress. "You saw that, right?" he asked her. She stood, unsure what to respond. "It's okay. I need a witness for social services to step in. She has my kids, and I promised to protect them." They stood there, the three of them in the lounge, tension filling the air. "How long has this been going on?" David looked at his wife, Gemma. His arms were held tightly by his side, hands balled into fists. Gemma's face flushed red, and her mouth went as dry as sandpaper. She glanced over at Andrew, who didn't look back but seemed calm, a thin smile on his face. "What?" David stared at Gemma, his deep blue eyes holding her attention trance-like, awaiting a response. "David, it's not what you think." Her long blonde hair fell across her shoulders in ringlets. "Don't treat me like a fool," he snarled. "I know what's happening here." He ran his fingers through his jet black hair, pulling it away from his eyes. "If you let me explain," Gemma started. "Explain what exactly? Why you're sleeping with my supposed best friend? That would be a good place to begin." David shot a look over to Andrew, who was still smiling, but now had his arms folded, his bald head reflecting the overhead light. Gemma began to sob, her chin resting on her chest. David almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You're away so much, and Andrew was so kind to me." She lifted her head. "I didn't mean it to happen. We just went for a drink one night and, well, one thing led to another." She shrugged her narrow shoulders and wiped her eyes with a tissue. David could barely hold back his rage. "How long?" "Long enough to know that we are meant for each other." Andrew had unfolded his arms and went to comfort Gemma. "You're supposed to be my friend. How could you do this to me? Your job has become more important than Gemma. That's why you're losing her. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time to pick up the pieces." A coldness ran through David as he watched his wife being comforted. He reached his hand into his pocket and pulled out the gun with 3 bullets loaded. He took careful aim. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's episode. Now run away, children. Run away back to your beds and get some sleep, if you can. I'll see you next time in the library. If you dare.